Her empty hands sought to give shape to silence. Elena had turned solitude into her only home, while rain struck the windows of a house too large for her pain, until olive-colored eyes found her on the dusty path, carrying a worn suitcase and the echo of a forgotten promise. Sometimes life finds us when we believe we've lost it forever, and reminds us that love can bloom even in the most barren soil. If this story has touched your heart, leave us your like, as one leaves flowers on a path. Others will travel, and tell us, how do you imagine this encounter between two wounded souls seeking a new dawn will end? The sun barely awakened behind the mountains when Elena spotted the figure walking down the dirt path, a tiny speck against the ochre canvas of the Castilian landscape. The April wind caressed the still green wheat fields, creating golden waves under the nascent light. From the window of her old stone house, she watched as the silhouette approached with the slowness of one, carrying the world on their shoulders. Lucia Martinez was 11 years old and had eyes that had seen too much. Her faded blue dress fluttered against her thin legs, and a small, worn leather suitcase seemed to weigh like lead in her fingers. Road dust had adhered to her cheeks, mixing with traces of dried tears that no one had bothered to wipe away. Elena Sola wasn't expecting visitors. She hadn't expected any in the 3 years she'd been taking refuge in that house inherited from her grandmother on the outskirts of Almariego, a town so small it didn't even appear on most maps. Ceramics was her only company, clay transformed by her hands into vessels that held silences. When the girl reached the cracked wooden gate, she stopped. Her eyes, the color of ripe olives, met Elena's across the distance. "Are you Elena Sola?" she asked with a voice that sounded like broken glass. The ceramicist. The wind seemed to stop for an instant, as if the world held its breath. "I am," Elena replied without moving from the window. "Who's asking?" The girl raised her chin with a dignity improper for her age. "My name is Lucia Martinez. My mother was Isabel. Isabel Martinez." She paused, swallowing hard. "She told me that if anything ever happened to her, I should come find you." Something inside Elena broke without making a sound. A name she hadn't heard in almost 12 years. A name she had buried along with everything else. Time seemed suspended while both looked at each other across the distance. Finally, Elena opened the door. Elena's house was like herself, austere, silent, with corners full of light and others plunged in perpetual shadows. The whitewashed walls kept the coolness even on the hottest days, and the worn tile floor told stories of footsteps no one remembered anymore. Lucia observed everything with the caution of a wild animal. Her fingers brushed surfaces as if she could read secrets through touch. In the center of the main room, a potter's wheel occupied the place of honor, surrounded by shelves with pieces in different stages of creation. The smell of damp clay permeated the air. "Your mother and I grew up together," Elena finally said, placing a cup of mint tea in front of the girl. "Then, life took us down different paths. She never stopped talking about you," Lucia replied, her small hands gripping the cup like an anchor. "She said you could hear what the earth says." Elena felt the weight of memories settle on her shoulders. Isabel with her laugh like little bells and her hands always stained with colors. Isabel who had chosen the world while Elena took refuge in the silence of clay. "Where is your mother now?" she asked, though something inside her already knew the answer. Lucia's eyes clouded, but the tears didn't fall. "She went to sleep 3 weeks ago. She didn't wake up again." Her voice sounded distant, as if speaking of something that had happened in another life. "The doctor said her heart was tired, that it had been fighting for years." Elena closed her eyes. In her mind she saw Isabel dancing in the summer rain, with her dress clinging to her skin, and her hair turned into dark serpents. They were 16, and the world was an open promise. "The letter says you would receive me," Lucia continued, pulling a wrinkled envelope from her dress pocket. "It says you would know what to do." Elena took the envelope with trembling fingers. Isabel's handwriting, unmistakable, even after so many years. Letters that danced like she herself did, unable to stay completely straight. "I don't know anything about children," Elena murmured, more to herself than to Lucia. "I live alone for a reason." Lucia looked at her without blinking. "I don't know anything about being alone either," she replied simply. "I suppose we can learn together." In the workshop, a freshly thrown vessel began to dry, its form still vulnerable to the slightest touch, like themselves at that instant. The first days, were an awkward dance between two strangers united by the ghost of an absent one. Elena assigned Lucia the small room facing the garden, where blue walls reminded one of a perpetually clear sky. At night, she heard the girl talking in her sleep, broken words narrating incomplete stories. Lucia woke at dawn as if fearing Elena might disappear during the night. She sat silently in a corner of the workshop, watching how the ceramicist's hands transformed the formless into beauty. Sometimes she drew in a worn notebook she had brought with her. She never showed her drawings. On the third day, Elena broke a piece. Her normally precise fingers failed while shaping the rim of a bowl. The clay, sensitive to her doubt, collapsed in her hands. "Sometimes you have to break to create something new," Lucia said, and for a moment she sounded so old that Elena felt a chill run down her spine. "Did your mother teach you that?" she asked. Lucia shook her head. "I learned it watching her paint. When a painting didn't work, she covered it with white and started over. Her fingers moved in the air, imitating invisible brushstrokes. She said the canvas remembered what was underneath, and that made the new painting deeper." Elena gathered the pieces of clay and returned them to the recycling bucket. Her hands were marked with reddish-brown, as if the earth itself had touched her. "Come here," she said suddenly, pointing to the stool in front of the wheel. Lucia approached cautiously. "Sit. Put your hands like this." Elena placed her own hands over Lucia's small ones, guiding them toward the wet clay she had placed on the wheel. "Close your eyes. Don't think. Feel." The wheel began to turn. Under Elena's guidance, Lucia's hands pressed the clay, at first with fear, then with growing confidence. The column of mud rose, hollowed out, took shape. "It's talking," Lucia whispered, with her eyes still closed. "The clay is telling a story." A solitary tear rolled down Elena's cheek. She had forgotten that sensation, the magical moment when matter seemed to come alive, when hands became mere instruments of something older and wiser. What emerged wasn't perfect. It had imperfections, marks of inexpert fingers, but in that small, misshapen vessel there was an honesty that Elena had lost in her own creations, so technically perfect as they were emotionally empty. That night, Elena pulled from the bottom of a trunk a framed photograph. Two teenagers embracing in front of a river, with summer light dancing on their faces. Isabel and herself, before different dreams took them down separate paths. "Why did you send her to me, Isabel?" she whispered to the photograph. "What did you see in me that I can't see myself?" In her room, Lucia drew hands intertwined with clay. May arrived with rains that transformed the fields into a tapestry of intense greens splashed with the vibrant red of poppies. Elena began to notice small changes in the house's routine, cups appearing in different places, windows opened to let in a breeze she had previously kept out, wildflowers in improvised vases on the table. One morning, she found Lucia in the garden, talking with Teresa, the elderly woman who lived in the neighboring house and who cultivated the most fragrant aromatic herbs in the region. "This girl has earth hands," Teresa said when she saw Eleanor approaching. "She's helped me transplant the rosemary and sage. She knows how to listen to plants." Lucia smiled shyly, her fingers stained with green and brown. "Teresa told me there's a school in town," the girl said as they returned home, with other children. Eleanor felt something tighten inside her. The town was territory she avoided. 3 years living on the outskirts, and she barely knew half a dozen of its inhabitants. "Do you want to go to school?" she asked cautiously. Lucia shrugged, a gesture she had begun to adopt when she didn't want to reveal too much. "Mom always said it was important to learn," she replied, "but she also said you can learn in many ways." That afternoon, while Lucia napped, Eleanor walked through the house with new eyes. She saw the empty spaces she had left, the bare walls, the lifeless corners. She saw her existence reduced to the essential, as if she had been counting days to leave. In the workshop, she found Lucia's notebook forgotten on a stool. She opened it with a feeling of guilt that dissolved into amazement. Page after page of drawings. Elena working at the wheel, the mountain profile seen from the window, Teresa's hands among the herbs, and portraits of a woman who could only be Isabel, captured in different moments, always with a smile that seemed to guard secrets. The last drawing was different. It showed 3 female figures intertwined like roots of the same tree, an adult woman, an elderly woman, and between them a girl. Their faces weren't defined, but Elena recognized the scene. It wasn't a memory, but a drawn wish. When Lucia woke up, she found Elena sitting at the kitchen table with a map spread out. "The school is here," Elena pointed to a spot on the map. "We would have to walk half an hour each morning. Sometimes it rains, and in winter it's very cold," she paused. "But we could try." Lucia didn't smile, but her eyes acquired a brightness Elena hadn't seen before. "We would?" she asked in a low voice. "If you go, I'll accompany you," Elena replied, surprising herself with the certainty of her words. "I don't know how to be a Mother Lucia, but I can learn to walk beside you." That night, for the first time since she had arrived, Lucia slept without talking in her dreams. The school was a stone building with red tiles and a courtyard where a centennial elm grew. On the first day, Lucia squeezed Elena's hand so hard she left crescent marks on her palm. 7 children watched her with the curiosity reserved for rare species. The teacher, Pilar Mendoza, a woman of about 50 with hair pulled back in a severe bun, received her with a tired but genuine smile. "Isabel was my friend," she told Elena, while the children went out for recess. "She came to see me a few months ago. She told me about her illness and about you." "Did you know she was sick?" Elena asked with a thread of voice. Pilar nodded. "Isabel always knew what she wanted, even at the end." Her eyes softened. "She wanted Lucia to have roots, Elena, and she chose you." The words floated between them like pollen in spring. "I don't know if I can be what Lucia needs," Elena confessed. "No one ever knows," Pilar replied. "But I see how she looks at you. You're already more than you think." During the following weeks, Lucia began to slowly integrate into school. She was reserved, but intelligent and observant. The other children accepted her with that ease young people have for adapting to new presences. At home, they established routines, shared breakfasts before walking to school, afternoons in the workshop, where Lucia had begun creating her own pieces, small figures that seemed like silent guardians, dinners during which little by little they shared fragments of their stories. "My father left when I was 5, Lucia told one night, while peeling potatoes with the concentration of one performing a ritual. "Mom said he belonged to the wind and we belonged to the earth." Elena nodded, recognizing Isabel's poetic language. "Do you miss him?" she asked. Lucia seemed to reflect, her fingers moving precisely over the potato. "You can't miss what you never really had," she finally replied. "I miss the idea of a father." Elena thought about her own story, about her parents, so physically present as emotionally absent, about how she had learned to find warmth in clay when she couldn't find it in embraces. "My grandmother taught me to work with clay," she said, offering a part of herself in exchange. "My parents wanted me to study something useful. She defended me. She left me this house so I could be who I needed to be." Lucia looked at her with that intensity that sometimes frightened Elena. "And who do you need to be now?" she asked. The question hung suspended between them, like clay waiting for form. That night, while Lucia slept, Elena pulled from the closet a box she had kept closed for years. Inside were letters from Isabel, postcards from places she had visited, small shared treasures, and a ceramic pendant that Elena had created especially for her. A red poppy, symbol of fragility and strength, of ephemeral but intense life. Isabel had returned it to her the last time they saw each other, before Elena retreated to the solitude of her grandmother's house. "Keep it until you're ready to remember without pain," she had said. The next morning, Elena placed it on the breakfast table in front of Lucia. "It was your mother's. Now it's yours." Lucia took it in her fingers as if it were a living flame. "It's a poppy," she said, "like the ones on the road." Elena nodded. "Poppies are survivors. They grow where other flowers can't. They bend with the wind but never break." Like us, she thought, but didn't say it aloud. June brought with it a heat that transformed the air into a palpable entity. The river that crossed the lands near Almariego became a refuge for the town's inhabitants. On Sundays, entire families congregated on its banks to escape the heat and share meals in the open air. Lucia returned from school one afternoon with an invitation clutched in her hand. Martin, one of her classmates, was celebrating his birthday with a picnic by the river. "Can we go?" she asked, with a mixture of hope and doubt in her voice. Elena felt the weight of what that simple question meant. It wasn't just attending a children's party. It was emerging from the bubble they had both created, integrating into the social fabric of the town she had avoided for years. "Do you want me to go with you?" she asked, buying time. Lucia nodded vehemently. "Martin says his father makes the best tortillas in the world, but I told him yours are better." A shy smile lit up her face. "Besides, I've never been to a birthday party." The confession hit Elena like a stone. She remembered her own childhood, birthdays shared with Isabel and other children from the town where they grew up, the normalcy that Lucia had never known. "We'll go," she said, and the fear of exposing herself was overcome by the desire to see Lucia experience something so ordinary and yet so special as a children's celebration. Sunday arrived with a clear sky that promised the hottest day of the year. Elena prepared a tortilla, just as Lucia had suggested, and together they walked toward the river. The sound of laughter and conversations guided them to a clearing where several families had spread blankets on the grass. Mrs. Mendoza, the teacher, was the first to greet them. Then other parents approached, some with curiosity barely concealed on their faces. Elena tensed under the scrutiny, but to her surprise, she was received without the judgments she had so feared. "Lucia is an extraordinary girl," Carmen, Martin's mother, told her while they watched the children play in the shallow edge of the river. "She's helped my son a lot with math. She has a special way of explaining things." Elena observed Lucia, who for the first time since she'd known her seemed completely like a child, splashing in the water, laughing with abandon, her dark hair shining under the sun like a raven's wing. "She's suffered a lot," Elena murmured. Carmen nodded understandingly. "Children are like water, Elena. They find their way through cracks, adapt to new channels, but they need safe shores." Something in the metaphor resonated deeply in Elena. She, who had always worked with the solidity of earth, had never considered water's fluidity as a strength. Later, when the sun began to descend, Antonio, Martin's father, organized a game. Each child had to model with clay an animal that represented their family, and then the adults would try to guess which animal each child had chosen. Elena held her breath when Lucia's turn came. The girl had worked concentratedly, hiding her creation with her body. When she finally showed it, it wasn't an animal she had molded, but two human figures with their backs to the viewer, looking at the horizon with joined hands. "It's not an animal," Martin said, confused. "No," Lucia replied calmly. "It's Elena and me, looking for our way together." The silence that followed was broken by Carmen. "It's beautiful, Lucia," she said, and then looked at Elena with a complicit smile. "I think you've perfectly captured the essence of your family." Family. The word floated in the air like a promise. On the way home, with the setting sun tinting the path in coppery tones, Lucia took Elena's hand. "Are we a family?" she asked, with her characteristic simplicity. Elena gently squeezed the small hand within hers. "I think we're learning to be one," she replied. Honestly? Lucia seemed satisfied with the answer. "Families are like your vessels," she said after a moment. "It doesn't matter what shape they have. What's important is that they contain something valuable." Eleanor felt something expand within her chest, like clay receiving water, transforming from inert matter into possibility. July was advancing with its implacable heat when the first letters arrived. 3 identical envelopes with the official seal of the Department of Social Services. Elena contemplated them on the kitchen table while coffee cooled in her cup. Lucia's arrival had been an act of faith, sustained by Isabel's letter and the tacit acceptance of a small town where formalities sometimes dissolved in favor of deeper truths. But the outside world had its own rules, its inescapable procedures. "They're about me, aren't they?" Lucia asked from the doorway, with a perception that Elena had stopped finding surprising. Elena nodded, unable to lie. "The system needs to know you're well, that you're where you should be," she explained, carefully choosing her words. "It's their way of protecting you." Lucia sat across from her, with that ancient calm that sometimes enveloped her. "And if they decide I shouldn't be here?" Her voice barely trembled. "If they think you're not suitable?" The question crystallized the fear Elena had been avoiding naming. It wasn't just the fear of losing Lucia, but the painful possibility that they might be right. What did she know? About raising a girl? What right did she have to this improvised family? "We'll fight," she replied with a firmness she didn't know she possessed. "Your mother entrusted you to me for a reason. I won't fail her. I won't fail you." she wanted to add, but the words got stuck in her throat. The first visit came a week later. Mercedes Ortiz, social worker, 40-something years old, in a suit too formal for the heat, and an expression that tried to balance professionalism with empathy. She toured the house with evaluating eyes, taking notes in a notebook she never let them see. She observed Lucia's room, now decorated with her drawings and small sculptures. She inspected the kitchen, the bathroom, the workshop. She asked questions about routines, about school, about plans for the future. "There's no record of Lucia's mother naming you as legal guardian," she finally said, sitting in the living room with a cup of tea she had barely touched. "We only have your word and a personal letter that legally doesn't have sufficient validity." Elena felt the ground become unstable under her feet. "Isabel and I grew up together. She trusted me to care for her daughter. Isn't that what's most important?" Mercedes looked at her with an indecipherable expression. "The system doesn't work that way, Elena. There are protocols, evaluations, requirements. We need to guarantee that Lucia is in a stable and adequate environment. And this doesn't seem stable to you." Elena's voice rose slightly. "She has a home, goes to school, is integrated into the community. You've lived practically as a hermit for years," Mercedes replied calmly. "You don't have close family, stable income, or experience with children. From an objective perspective, there are many red flags." The words stuck like splinters under Elena's skin. The worst part was that she couldn't refute them because they contained truth. "Tell me about your long-term plans," Mercedes continued. "Have you considered formal adoption?" The question took Elena by surprise. Adoption. A permanent, legal, irrevocable commitment. A step she wasn't sure she was prepared for. "We're adapting," she replied cautiously. "Taking one day at a time. Children need more than that." Mercedes's voice softened. "They need certainties, promises that won't be broken." After the social worker left, Eleanor sat in silence, feeling the weight of a decision she had been avoiding. Lucia appeared beside her like a shadow. "Are they going to take me away?" she asked in a small voice. Elena wanted to promise they wouldn't, that nothing would separate them, but empty promises were cruel. "Not if we can help it," she said instead, extending her hand toward the girl. "Come, there's something I want to show you." She led her to the end of the garden, where the house's land bordered open fields. An old pomegranate tree stood solitary, its twisted branches extended like arms seeking the sky. "My grandmother planted this tree the day I was born," Eleanor explained. "She said it would grow with me, that its roots would be my roots." Lucia touched the rough bark with reverence. "What are we going to do?" she asked. Eleanor breathed deeply. "We're going to plant you a tree, Lucia, and then we're going to fight so you can watch it grow." That afternoon they dug a hole together. Elena had chosen a young almond tree, a tree that blooms in the middle of winter, when everything seems asleep. "Roots are invisible," she said as they placed the small tree in the earth. "But they're what keeps the tree standing during storms." As they covered the roots with earth, Elena made a decision, not from impulse or fear, but from recognition of a truth that had been growing silently, like roots under the earth. "I want to adopt you, Lucia," she said with a clear voice. "Not just for now, but forever, if you want." Lucia looked at her with bright eyes. "Like a real family?" "We're already a real family," Elena replied, surprised by the certainty she felt. "We just want the rest of the world to recognize it too." Lucia didn't respond with words. Instead, she took a handful of earth and carefully added it around the newly planted almond tree, a gesture as simple as it was profound, helping to create roots. August arrived loaded with heat and papers. The adoption application became a labyrinth of forms, interviews, and evaluations that seemed designed to discourage the less determined. Elena discovered reserves of patience and determination she didn't know she possessed. Pilar Mendoza, Lucia's teacher, wrote a letter of recommendation so eloquent that Elena cried reading it. Teresa, the elderly neighbor, appeared one day with a cake and a sworn statement affirming she had observed the flowering of a love as genuine as the herbs in my garden. The town's mayor, Don Augusto, a man sparse with words who barely knew Elena, signed a document attesting to the suitability of her character. A community that Elena had kept at distance now approached like a silent tide, supporting her cause as their own. In the midst of this administrative whirlwind, Lucia seemed to find her own balance. She had begun attending ceramics classes with other children at the town's cultural center. Her creations, though technically imperfect, possessed a narrative quality that surprised even Elena. Small figures that told stories, vessels with reliefs that seemed like maps of imaginary places. One afternoon, Elena found Lucia sitting on the workshop floor, surrounded by old photographs she had discovered in a forgotten box. "Is this my mother?" she asked, pointing to an image where two teenagers smiled at the camera, with hair tousled by wind and arms intertwined. Elena sat beside her, taking the photograph carefully. "Yes, we were 17. It was the summer before she left for Madrid to study fine arts." Lucia studied the image intently. "She looks like me," she finally said, "but her smile is different." Elena looked more closely. It was true. Isabel smiled with her whole body, as if joy were too big to contain only in her lips. Lucia had a more contained, more cautious smile. "Your mother lived every emotion to the maximum," Elena explained. "She was like fire, bright and unstoppable." "And is that why you distanced yourself from her?" The question arose without warning, sharp as a pin. Elena felt the air leave her lungs. How could a girl see with such clarity what she herself had taken years to understand? "Sometimes we distance ourselves from what we love most because we're scared of what it makes us feel," she replied honestly. "Your mother wanted to devour the world. I just wanted a quiet corner where I could create." Lucia nodded, as if the answer confirmed something she already knew. "But now you're here," she said, "and I am too." The simplicity of the observation moved Elena. Yes, here they both were, united by Isabel's absence, but creating something new from that loss. "Do you think she would have liked it?" Lucia asked, pointing around them, at the workshop, at the house, at the life they were building. Elena smiled, feeling a deep certainty. "She wouldn't have liked it," she replied. "She would have loved it." That night, Elena woke up startled. She had dreamed of Isabel, not as she remembered her, but as she would have been now, with expression lines around her eyes and perhaps some premature grey hairs in her dark hair. In the dream, Isabel was telling her something important, but upon waking, the words had vanished like mist in the sun. She got up and walked to Lucia's room. The door was ajar, as always since the girl had arrived. In the moon's silver light, she observed her profile at rest, the curve of her cheek that reminded her so much of Isabel, the small wrinkle between her eyebrows that appeared even in dreams, sign of a mind always active. "I'm taking care of her," Elena thought, directing the thought to Isabel, wherever she might be. "We're taking care of each other." Returning to her room, she found something on her pillow that hadn't been there before. A small clay figure, a woman with extended arms, as if about to fly or embrace the world. Underneath, written in Lucia's irregular handwriting, a simple phrase, "So you won't be alone in your dreams." Elena held the figurine against her heart, feeling how something that had been asleep for years slowly awakened inside her, the capacity to love without fear. September brought with it the return to school and a change in the quality of light. The sunsets became shorter, painting the landscape with golden and copper tones that transformed the fields into living tapestries. One afternoon, while Elena worked on a special commission for the town's annual craft exhibition, Lucia returned from school with a crumpled paper in her hand and an expression that oscillated between excitement and fear. "Miss Pilar says I have talent," she announced, extending the paper toward Elena. "She wants me to participate in the regional youth art contest." The paper turned out to be a registration form for a prestigious contest that traveled throughout the province, discovering young talents in various artistic disciplines. "Do you want to participate?" Elena asked, observing how Lucia nervously balanced from one foot to the other. The girl nodded, but her eyes revealed doubts. "Miss Pilar says I could present my clay sculptures or my drawings, but—" her voice faded. "But?" Elena encouraged her to continue. "Mom always participated in contests." The words came out in a whisper. "She said art should be shared, that it makes no sense if it stays locked up, but she also said that every time she showed her work, it was like undressing in front of strangers." Elena felt a knot in her throat. Isabel and her poetic way of explaining the most complex things. She was right, she confirmed. "It's vulnerable, it's scary, but it's also liberating." Lucia raised her gaze. "Did you also participate in contests?" Elena shook her head. "I was always afraid. I preferred to create in silence for myself," She paused. Maybe that's why your mother sent you to me, so we could both learn something we were missing. The idea floated between them like a revelation. Isabel, even in her absence, continued being a bridge between worlds, the courage to show oneself and the strength of silence. Will you help me? Lucia asked. To prepare something for the contest? Elena smiled. On one condition, she replied. That you help me too. With what? To present my work at the Madrid gallery that's been contacting me for years. The words came out before Eleanor could contain them, as if they had been waiting for this moment. If you dare, I will too. The pact was sealed with a handshake that became a spontaneous hug, the kind of physical contact that was still rare between them, but that became more natural with each passing day. During the following weeks, the workshop transformed into a space of shared creation. Elena taught techniques but learned as much as she taught. Lucia's fresh gaze, her willingness to experiment without fear of failure, her way of combining colors Elena would never have considered, all of this revitalized her own artistic practice. For her project, Lucia decided to create a series of 7 small sculptures representing emotional states. They weren't literal figures, but abstractions that captured the essence of feelings like fear, hope, loss, joy. This is the most important one, she explained while working on the last piece, her small fingers giving shape to a structure that seemed to expand from a solid center. It's love, not the romantic kind, but the other kind, the one that remains. Eleanor observed the piece in silence. It was surprisingly sophisticated for someone so young, 2 forms that supported each other, creating a protected space between them. How do you know so much? She finally asked. Lucia continued working without looking up. I learned by observing, she replied simply. Mom with her paintings, you with your clay, people when they think no one is watching them. For her own exhibition, Eleanor created a collection titled Beautiful Scars, inspired by the Japanese technique of kintsugi, which repairs broken ceramics with gold, honoring fractures instead of hiding them. Each piece told a story of rupture and rebirth, of fragility converted into strength. On the day of submitting works for the contest, it rained. A deep, fine, persistent rain that transformed the world into watercolor. Lucia carefully wrapped her sculptures in tissue paper and placed them in a box Eleanor had specially prepared. What if they don't like them? She suddenly asked, with the vulnerability proper to her 11 years emerging through her usual composure. Elena knelt to be at her height, holding her hands between hers. Art isn't about pleasing everyone, she said. It's about telling the truth as you see it. And you, Lucia Martinez, see truths that many adults fail to perceive. The girl smiled a little calmer. Even if I don't win, especially if you don't win, Elena replied, because you will have been brave anyway. And that, I promise you, is always worth it. Under the rain, they walked together toward the town hall where works were collected. Their silhouettes, one tall and one small, reflected in puddles, like in fragmented mirrors, joining and separating with each step, but always advancing in the same direction. October unfolded its palette of ochres and vermilions over the fields. Days grew shorter, and with them came a new letter from social services. This time, it wasn't an evaluation or a form, but a notification. Fernando Martinez, Lucia's father, had been located in Portugal and notified of his daughter's situation. According to current legislation, he had the right to request custody, or, at least, to be part of the adoption process. Elena read the letter 3 times, as if the words could change, with each reading. The date indicated that Fernando had a month to respond. 3 weeks had already passed without news. Will you tell Lucia? Pilar asked when Elena visited her at school, seeking advice. Elena pressed the teacup between her hands, feeling the heat pass through the ceramic. I don't know how, she confessed. She barely talks about him. I don't know what memories she has, what she expects, what she fears. Children are stronger than we think, Pilar replied with the wisdom of one who has seen generations grow, and more fragile than they seem. Uncertainty can be more damaging than a difficult truth. That night, after dinner, Eleanor sat with Lucia on the small porch facing the garden. The air smelled of damp earth and the last roses of the year. There's something I must tell you, she began, carefully choosing her words. Social services have located your father. Lucia became very still, like a small animal that senses a predator's presence. Is he coming to get me? She finally asked, with a voice so small it was barely audible. We don't know, Elena replied honestly. They've informed him about your situation and about our adoption process. He has the right to respond, to be part of decisions about your future. And if he wants to take me with him? The question hung suspended between them like glass about to break. Elena breathed deeply, fighting against the impulse to promise protections she might not be able to fulfill. If that happens, we'll fight, she finally said, legally with everything we can. But we'll also have to listen, Lucia. Listen to what he has to say and what you want. I want to stay with you. The words came out with unexpected force. He left. He doesn't know me. He doesn't know who I am now. Elena took her small hand between hers. I promise you that your voice will be heard, that I'll do everything possible to make it so. That night, Lucia had nightmares. Elena found her sitting in bed, with her eyes wide, open, looking at the darkness as if it contained ghosts visible only to her. I don't remember his face, the girl confessed while Eleanor sat beside her. I only remember his back walking away, and the sound of the door closing. Eleanor embraced her in silence, letting the tears finally come, not as a sudden flood, but as a soft, constant rain that cleans accumulated dust for years. The following days were marked by a silent tension. Lucia became quieter, more observant. At school, her teacher noticed she had stopped participating in class, although her work remained exceptional. One afternoon, while Eleanor prepared dinner, Lucia appeared in the kitchen with a question that seemed to have been forming for days. Do you think people can change? She asked, with the gravity of one contemplating an abyss. Really change? Elena left the knife she was using to cut vegetables and turned toward her. I think they can. Yes, she replied after a moment. But it's not easy, and it doesn't always happen. Have you changed? Lucia's eyes searched for a certainty Elena wasn't sure she could offer. I'm changing, she replied honestly. Every day a little. With you. Something in the response seemed to satisfy Lucia, at least temporarily. She sat at the table and began folding napkins with meticulous precision. If he has changed and wants to meet me, will I have to choose? She finally asked. Between him and you? The question hit Eleanor with the force of a revelation. It wasn't just the fear of losing Lucia that tormented her. It was the fear that Lucia would have to face an impossible choice. It shouldn't be like that, she replied, sitting across from her. If your father has really changed, if he really wants what's best for you, then he'll understand it's not about choosing, it's about expanding, adding, not subtracting. The words sounded convincing, but Elena wasn't sure she completely believed them. The world was rarely so simple, so generous. The response. Deadline came and passed without news. Mercedes, the social worker, informed them that the adoption process would continue as planned. Fernando's absence was interpreted as a tacit renunciation to intervene. It should have been a relief, but Elena noticed that Lucia seemed to carry a new weight on her shoulders. One night she found her sitting in the workshop, molding clay by the light of a single lamp. "What are you doing awake so late?" she asked softly, not wanting to startle her. Lucia didn't look up from her work. A male figure without a face, with arms extended forward, as if offering something invisible. "I'm trying to remember him," she replied. "To imagine him. To understand why he didn't want to meet me again." Elena felt her heart clench. She approached and sat next to Lucia, observing the anonymous figure taking shape under her fingers. "Sometimes people aren't capable of facing their own mistakes," she said after a long silence. "Not because they don't care about you, but because they care so much that the guilt is unbearable." "How do you know?" Lucia looked at her intently. "Because I also fled once," Elena confessed. "From your mother, from our shared dreams, from everything that scared me. I hid here, in this house, with my hands in clay and my heart closed." "But you came back," Lucia said. "Or at least, you didn't reject me when I arrived." Elena felt tears forming in her eyes. "I wasn't brave, Lucia. You were the one who taught me to be." That night together they transformed the faceless figure. They didn't try to give it Fernando's features, or turn it into a villain or a hero. Instead, they converted it into a tree, with deep roots and branches extending toward the sky. "Some roots can't be seen," Lucia said as the clay took new form, "but they're still part of you." Eleanor nodded, understanding that absence sometimes is a presence as powerful as any other, and that healing doesn't mean forgetting, but transforming. November arrived with morning mists that turned the path to school into a dreamlike landscape. The cold began to settle in, and with it, a new routine. Hot tea before leaving, scarves knitted by Teresa, conversations that developed in the visible breath of their words. The regional youth art contest announced its finalists. Lucia Martinez's name appeared among the 10 selected in the sculpture category, with a special mention for emotional depth and technical maturity unusual for her age. The awards ceremony would take place at the Provincial Museum, an hour's journey from Almariego. The news ran through the town like water between stones, generating a wave of collective pride. Don Augusto, the mayor, organized a bus so neighbors could attend the event. An entire delegation to support our artist, he announced in the plaza, with the kind of solemnity he reserved for truly important occasions. The eve of the ceremony, while Elena helped Lucia choose what to wear, the phone rang. It was Mercedes, the social worker, with unexpected news. Fernando Martinez had finally contacted social services. He was in Spain and wanted to meet his daughter. He's requested to attend the awards ceremony, Mercedes explained, her voice professionally neutral. As an observer, not to intervene, he signed a document committing to respect the ongoing adoption process. Elena felt the ground move under her feet. She looked at Lucia, who was still focused on deciding between 2 blouses, oblivious to the conversation that was redrawing the contours of her world. "Why now?" Elena asked in a low voice. "Why like this?" "He says he saw the finalists' announcement in the regional press," Mercedes replied. "He recognized the surname, made some calls. He seems genuinely interested in seeing his daughter even from a distance." When Elena hung up, she sat on the edge of the bed, feeling the weight of an impossible decision. Did she have the right to filter this information? To decide whether Lucia should or shouldn't know that her father would be present? "Is something wrong?" Lucia's voice pulled her from her thoughts. The girl was observing her with that sharp perception that sometimes frightened Elena. "Not wrong," she replied carefully, "but important. Sit with me, please." She explained the situation with as much clarity as possible, being careful not to impose her own emotions, to leave space for Lucia to form her own. "Do you want him to be there?" she finally asked. "We can. Say no. No one will force you to see him if you don't want to." Lucia remained silent for so long that Elena began to worry. Her hands, usually expressive, were still on her lap. "I want him to be there," she finally said, with a voice so small Elena barely heard it. "But I don't want to talk to him, not yet. I just want him to see me." The maturity of the response surprised Elena. It wasn't resentment or fear she heard, but a kind of prudent curiosity, a willingness to open a door without necessarily crossing the threshold. "That's how it will be then," she promised, taking Lucia's hands in hers. "I'll be by your side at all times, and if you change your mind at any moment, we'll leave. No questions, no reproaches." The morning of the ceremony dawned clear and cold. The town bus was full. Teacher Pilar, Teresa with a bouquet of aromatic herbs to calm nerves, Carmen and Antonio with their son Martin, and other neighbors who had gone from being strangers to becoming a kind of extended family. At the museum, the finalist works were displayed in a special room. Lucia's series of sculptures, simply titled 7, occupied a central pedestal. Visitors and judges stopped before them, commenting in low voices, pointing out details. Elena felt Lucia tense beside her, but not from anticipation of the prize. Her eyes constantly scanned the room, searching among unknown faces for one that might awaken a sleeping memory. "How will I know who he is?" she whispered, squeezing Elena's hand. "I don't know," she replied honestly, "but maybe he'll find a way for you to know." The ceremony began with speeches from local authorities and jury members. Lucia was called to the podium to receive an honorable mention. Her work hadn't won first prize, but had received special recognition for most original vision. As she climbed the steps toward the podium, Elena watched her transform. The shy girl who had arrived at her door months ago now walked with quiet dignity, holding the audience's gaze without faltering. She thanked for the prize with simple but eloquent words, mentioning her mother, who taught her to see with her heart, and Elena, who taught her to give shape to the invisible. It was at that moment, while Lucia spoke, that Elena saw him, a man of about 40 standing at the back of the room. She didn't need anyone to point him out. the way he looked at Lucia, with a mixture of pride and pain so deep it was almost intrusive to witness. Clearly, identified him as Fernando Martinez. Their eyes met briefly across the distance. There was no hostility in that gaze, no claim, only a silent recognition, that of two people united by love for the same being. When Lucia returned to her side, Elena said nothing. It wasn't her moment to speak, but she felt when the girl's body tensed, her gaze fixed on a point behind them. Somehow, she had identified her father among the crowd. "He's here, isn't he?" she whispered, without looking away. The tall man with a beard near the exit. Elena nodded softly. "Do you want to approach?" she asked. "Not today," she replied, "but maybe someday." When the ceremony ended, as they headed toward the bus with the rest of the town, Elena noticed that Lucia stopped and turned. A few meters away, Fernando remained motionless, as if waiting for something he didn't dare ask for. Lucia released Elena's hand and walked a few steps toward him. She said nothing, made no dramatic gesture. She simply stopped at a prudent distance and looked at him directly, allowing him to really see her, perhaps for the first time in years. It was a moment suspended in time, an invisible bridge stretched over an abyss of absences. Then, Lucia returned to Elena's side and took her hand again. "I'm ready to go home," she said, and in her voice there was a new serenity, as if she had closed a pending chapter. On the bus ride back, surrounded by the noisy joy of an entire town celebrating their little artist, Lucia leaned toward Elena. "You were right," she said in a low voice. "People can change. I saw in his eyes that he's no longer the same one who left." "And how does that make you feel?" Elena asked, fearing and needing the answer equally. Lucia reflected for a moment, her face serious under the intermittent light entering through the bus windows. "Like there's more space in my heart," she finally replied. "Not less, but more." Elena felt something heavy she had been carrying lighten. It didn't disappear. Completely, but transformed, like clay under fire, from a burden to a strength. December brought with it the first snowfalls and an official envelope with the courthouse letterhead. The date for the final adoption hearing had been set for the end of January. What had begun as a casual, almost mythical encounter on a dusty spring path would now be formalized under the weight of official seals and legal documents. The house transformed with preparations for the holidays. Lucia insisted on decorating every corner, as if wanting to compensate for years of contained celebrations. Elena, who had spent recent Christmases in voluntary solitude, found herself swept up by her enthusiasm. "My mother said that in December, light is more valuable because it's scarcer," Lucia commented while hanging light garlands in the living room. "That's why we have to create as much as we can." Elena smiled, recognizing Isabel's poetic philosophy in her daughter's words. Her daughter. The word, still, surprised her when it appeared in her thoughts, but each time it felt more natural, more true. One afternoon, while returning from town loaded with purchases, they found an unknown car parked in front of the house. Fernando Martinez waited on the porch, with a package in his hands and an expression of uncertainty. Elena felt Lucia stop beside her, her small body suddenly rigid, but there was no fear in her posture, only caution and perhaps a curiosity she didn't dare name. "You don't have to. Talk to him if you don't want to," Elena murmured, leaning so only Lucia could hear her. "I can ask him to leave." "It's okay," she said in a low voice. "I want to hear what he has to say." They advanced together toward the house. Fernando stood up when he saw them approaching, with the awkwardness of one who rehearses a moment 1,000 times, only to discover that reality is completely different. "Sorry for coming without warning," he said, addressing both of them. "I called the town hall and they gave me the address." Elena nodded, not fully trusting her voice. She opened the door and all three entered the house, loaded with a silence that seemed to occupy all available space. In the kitchen, while Elena prepared tea, Fernando and Lucia sat face to face at the table. The similarity between both was more evident now. The same defined line in the jaw, the same way of intertwining fingers when they were nervous. "I brought you something," Fernando finally said, pushing the package toward Lucia. "It's not a Christmas gift. It's something I should have given you long ago." Lucia opened the package with meticulous care. Inside was a photo album, old and worn from use. She opened it and held her breath. Eleanor, who had approached, saw it contained photographs of Isabel throughout the years, many with Lucia as a baby and small child. "I took this when I left," Fernando explained, his voice hoarse. "I had no right. They were your memories as much as mine. More yours, really." Lucia slowly turned the pages, absorbing images of a past she barely remembered, her mother laughing on a beach, herself, barely a bundle wrapped in blankets, the first 3 candles on a birthday cake. "Why did you leave?" she finally asked, looking up. There was no accusation in her voice, only a genuine need to understand. Fernando seemed to shrink before the direct question. His hands, large and rough, moved restlessly on the table. "There's no simple answer, Lucia," he said after a moment. "I could tell you I was young, that I was afraid, that I wasn't prepared. All would be true and all would be excuses." He paused. "The truth is, I failed. Your mother, you, myself. I have no justification." The silence that followed was dense but not hostile. Elena observed Lucia processing the words, her young face showing an understanding that went beyond her years. "Are you prepared now?" she finally asked. The question, simple and devastating, seemed to hit Fernando like a physical blow. His eyes filled with tears he struggled to contain. "I don't know," he replied honestly. "I want to believe I am, that I've learned, that I've grown. But I'm not coming to claim you, Lucia. I don't have that right." He looked briefly at Elena. "I know you found a home here. I don't want to disturb it." "Then what do you want?" Lucia's voice was firm, more adult than childish. "To know you," Fernando replied. "If you allow me, at your pace, on your terms, to be part of your life in whatever way you decide. A father, a friend, an acquaintance, whatever you need me to be." Elena felt a knot in her throat. There wasn't in those words the territorial claim she had so feared, but a humility she hadn't expected. Lucia closed the album and kept it on her lap like an anchor. "I don't remember you much," she finally said. "I have fragments, your voice reading me stories, the smell of your aftershave lotion, but I don't know who you are now." "I don't know who you are either," Fernando replied. "You've grown so much. You've become someone I don't know, but whom I'd like to know, if you give me that opportunity." Lucia looked at Elena, seeking, what? Permission? Advice? Security? Elena returned her gaze, trying to transmit with her eyes what she couldn't say with words, that she trusted her judgment, her heart. "We could start slowly," Lucia finally said, looking back at Fernando. "Maybe, could you come to the Christmas celebration in town? There will be many people, so it wouldn't be intense." The relief on Fernando's face was like sunrise. "I would love to," he replied. "Thank you." When Fernando left, promising to return for the town celebration, Lucia remained for a long time sitting at the table, leafing through the photo album. Elena sat beside her, respecting her silence. "Are you okay?" she finally asked. Lucia nodded slowly. "It's strange," she said. "For a long time, I imagined him as a monster, then as a prince who would return someday. Now, he's just a man, a sad man who made mistakes." Elena felt a wave of pride at the girl's wisdom. "Adults aren't as complicated as we seem," she said with a soft smile. "We're just equally lost, but we pretend not to be." Lucia smiled for the first time since Fernando's arrival. "You're not lost," she said with certainty. "You're exactly where you need to be." That night, while Lucia slept, Elena wrote a long letter to Isabel. It had no real addressee, but she needed to put into words everything she had experienced in recent months, the transformation, the fear, the unexpected joy. "I never imagined you would send me the most valuable gift in the form of a girl with a suitcase too big for her arms," she wrote. "I never imagined that the solitude I had cultivated as a virtue could dissolve so completely. I never imagined, Isabel, that I could love like this, without limits, without conditions, without expecting anything in return." Upon finishing the letter, she kept it in the same box where she had found the poppy pendant. Someday, perhaps, she would give it to Lucia, when she was older, when she was ready to understand that adults also grow, also learn, also transform under the fire of unexpected encounters. Christmas arrived wrapped in snow and new beginnings. The town celebration, traditionally held in the plaza, moved inside the town hall due to the storm. All of Almariego seemed to have gathered there, entire families, elderly people in their best clothes, children running between tables set for the occasion. Fernando arrived punctually, with a bouquet of flowers for Elena, for taking care of what I didn't know how to value, he said simply, and a set of professional watercolors for Lucia. His presence generated initial curiosity, but the community, with that collective wisdom that small towns sometimes possess, created a space for him without uncomfortable questions. Dinner passed between conversations and laughter. Lucia moved with growing confidence between the three worlds that now formed her existence. The town that had adopted her as their own, Elena, who had become her anchor, and Fernando, who represented a past that slowly integrated into her present. "It's surprising how children can adapt," Pilar commented, sitting next to Elena while they watched Lucia show her drawings to Fernando. "They have a capacity to integrate contradictions that adults lose." Elena nodded, feeling a mixture of emotions she couldn't completely name. "I was so afraid this would confuse her, hurt her," she confessed, "but she seems to be finding her own way through all this." "Don't underestimate your role in that," Pilar replied softly. "You've given her roots strong enough so she can extend her branches without fear." The metaphor, so close to what Elena had tried to teach Lucia with the almond tree planted months ago, touched something deep in her. Later, while the celebration continued, Elena found a moment to speak alone with Fernando on the small covered patio of the town hall. Snow fell softly on the other side of the windows, turning the world into a quieter, more intimate place. "I didn't come to complicate things," he said after a moment of silence. "If my presence causes more harm than good, I'll distance myself." Elena studied him carefully. The man before her wasn't the monster she had feared, nor the intruder she had anticipated. He was simply a human being trying to repair what he had broken, conscious that some fractures leave permanent scars. "Lucia needs you in her life," she finally replied. "Not as a constant presence, perhaps, at least not now, but as a part of her story that doesn't have to remain in the shadows." Fernando nodded, gratitude visible in his eyes. "The adoption," he began, and then seemed to search for the right words. "I want you to know I won't oppose it. I've signed all necessary documents. It's the right thing." "Why?" Eleanor asked, needing to understand. "Legally, you could claim rights. You could complicate everything." Fernando looked toward the room where Lucia conversed animatedly with Teresa and other neighbors. "Because I see her with you," he replied simply. "I see how she looks at you, how she leans on you without realizing it, how she flourishes under your care." He paused. "I spent years trying to escape my responsibilities. The least I can do now is not interfere with the best thing that's happened to her." Eleanor felt something loosen in her chest, a knot of tension that had been present since she learned of Fernando's existence. "You can continue being part of her life," she said, surprising herself with the offer. "Visits, letters, calls. It doesn't have to be all or nothing." "Do you mean it?" The incredulity in his voice was palpable. "Lucia has space in her heart for both of us," she replied, "and I'm learning not to be afraid of sharing." When they returned to the room, they found Lucia in the center of a group of children, narrating a story with broad gestures that captured everyone's attention. Her face was animated by a confidence Elena barely recognized in the silent girl who had arrived at her door. "There she is," Fernando said in a low voice. "Isabel's smile." And it was true. In that moment, with the garland lights reflecting on her face, Lucia was the living portrait of her mother, luminous, magnetic, fully present in the moment. That night, returning home under the snow that transformed the path into a fairy tale trail, Lucia walked between Elena and Fernando, unconsciously creating an image none of the three would have imagined possible months ago. "Will you come for the adoption hearing?" Lucia suddenly asked, looking at Fernando. The question took both adults by surprise. "If you want me to be there, I will be," he replied after a moment. "But it's your special day with Eleanor. I don't want to intrude." Lucia seemed to consider this with the seriousness she put into all her decisions. "I think you should come," she finally said, "to close a circle and open another, like in stories." Eleanor felt her eyes fill with tears that the cold immediately crystallized. Lucia's wisdom, her capacity to see patterns and meanings where others saw only disconnected events, never ceased to amaze her. "Circles are important," the girl added, as if explaining something obvious. "Things need to be completed to be able to begin again." Fernando looked at Elena over Lucia's head, a silent question in his eyes. Elena nodded slightly, giving her consent. "I'll be there then," he promised, to see how a circle closes and another opens. Upon arriving home, snow had created a white blanket over the garden. The young almond tree, barely visible under its winter covering, seemed like a silent sentinel guarding secrets under the frozen earth. "In spring it will bloom," Lucia said, stopping for a moment to observe it, "before all the other trees, when it seems winter will never end." Elena thought about everything they had traversed since that April day, when a girl with a too-big suitcase appeared on her path, about how pain can become beauty, about how absences can transform into presences of a different kind. "Yes," she replied, feeling the light weight of certainty. "It will bloom." The day of the adoption hearing dawned with a sky so clear and blue, it seemed like a promise. January was coming to an end, and although the cold still bit, there was in the air that subtle change that announces spring isn't far away. Lucia had carefully chosen her outfit, a blue dress that Teresa had sewn especially for the occasion, with small poppies embroidered on the collar and cuffs. Around her neck, the ceramic pendant Elena had created for Isabel shone like a small flame. Elena, for her part, had put on a suit she hadn't worn in years, relegated to the back of the closet since she had decided that formality was one of the many things she left behind upon moving to Almariego. The courthouse was in the provincial capital, an imposing building of stone and glass that intimidated with its mere presence. Fernando was already waiting at the entrance, with a bouquet of wildflowers he must have picked himself, judging by the imperfect but charming arrangement. "For both of you," he said, handing it over, "for the new beginning." The room where the hearing would take place was smaller and cozier than Elena had imagined. The judge, a woman of about 60 with kind but penetrating eyes, received them with a contained smile. The procedure was surprisingly simple. Formal questions, reviewed documents, brief statements. Fernando, when his turn came, spoke with a clarity that impressed Elena. "Lucia deserves stability, love, and the opportunity to flourish," he said, looking directly at the judge. "Elena Sola has given her all that and more. My wish is that this bond they've created receives the legal protection it deserves." When the judge asked Lucia if she understood what adoption meant, the girl responded with that mixture of simplicity and depth that characterized her. "It means we choose to be family," she said, "that we promise to take care of each other, not because we have to, but because we want to." The judge smiled, visibly moved. "It's a beautiful definition," she replied, "and very accurate." The culminating moment came when the judge pronounced the official words that legally transformed Elena and Lucia into mother and daughter. There were no fireworks, no angelic choirs, only the sound of a pen signing documents and the silent weight of a future beginning to unfold before them. Upon leaving the courthouse, the world seemed strangely the same and completely different at the same time. The winter sun illuminated the streets with that particular clarity of January, revealing details that would normally go unnoticed. The pattern of the tiles, the small cracks in the facades, the dance of their breaths' vapor in the cold air. Fernando accompanied them to the station, where they would take the train back to Almariego. A party awaited them in town, secretly organized by Pilar and Teresa, though both Elena and Lucia suspected it. "When will we see you again?" Lucia asked while they waited on the platform. Fernando seemed surprised by the direct question. "Whenever you want," he replied after a moment. "I could visit Almariego once a month, if that seems good to you, or we could meet halfway in the city." "Once a month sounds good," Lucia said with that firmness she sometimes adopted when she had made a decision. "You could teach me to fish, like you promised when I was little." The memory, emerging unexpectedly, seemed to hit Fernando forcefully. His eyes moistened. "Do you remember that?" he asked with a hoarse voice. Lucia nodded. "I remember more than you think," she replied. "It's just that some memories were asleep." On the train, while Fernando became an increasingly smaller figure on the platform, Elena observed Lucia's profile against the window. Her face reflected a serenity that went beyond her years, as if she had solved a particularly complex riddle. "Are you happy?" Elena asked, feeling the insufficiency of the word to encompass everything she wanted to ask. Lucia turned toward her, her face lighting up with a smile that was like sunrise. "I'm home," she replied simply. The journey passed in comfortable silence, each lost in her own thoughts. Eleanor watched the landscape pass. Fields, sleeping under winter, small towns like hers, distant mountains that stood out against the sky. Everything seemed part of a broader, more connected world than she had perceived in years. Upon arriving in Almariego, the platform was full. It seemed the entire town had decided to receive them. Handmade banners, flowers despite the season, smiling faces that had gone from being strangers to becoming chosen family. "The Solars have come home," someone shouted, and soon the name was chanted by dozens of voices. The Solars, mother and daughter, family. As they walked between embraces and congratulations toward the town plaza, where a long table waited under garlands of lights, Elena felt the circle Lucia had mentioned really completed itself. It wasn't an ending, but a new beginning, with deeper roots and stronger branches. That night, after the celebration, they returned home under a starry sky so bright it seemed to illuminate the path. The house received them with its welcoming silence, its whitewashed walls keeping warmth like an embrace. In the workshop, illuminated only by moonlight filtering through windows, Lucia stopped in front of the wheel. "I want to make something," she said. "Something special." Eleanor turned on the lamp, prepared the clay, adjusted the wheel. Together, as they had done so many times in recent months, they gave shape to a new piece. It wasn't a bowl, nor a vessel, nor a figure. It was something more abstract, more fluid, a form that seemed to unfold from a solid center, like a flower opening or a thought taking shape. "What is it?" Eleanor asked when the piece was finished, shining wet under the dim light. Lucia contemplated it with her head slightly tilted, as if she herself were discovering the answer. "It's a beginning," she finally said, "or maybe a memory of the future." Eleanor smiled, recognizing in those enigmatic words the echo of Isabel, but also something new, something uniquely Lucia. The girl who had arrived at her door almost a year ago had transformed, like clay under her hands, preserving her essence but finding a new form, stronger, more defined. Later, sitting on the porch despite the cold, looking toward the garden where the young almond tree patiently awaited spring, Lucia rested her head on Elena's shoulder. "Do you know what my mother told me once?" she asked in a low voice. "That people are like seeds. You never know what kind of tree they'll become until they start growing." Elena put an arm around her shoulders, feeling the daily miracle of this girl who was now her daughter. "Your mother was very wise," she replied. "You are too," Lucia said with that absolute certainty of childhood, just in a different way. On the horizon, the moon illuminated distant mountains, creating a landscape that seemed to belong as much to the real world as to a place of dreams. Elena thought about all the paths that had crossed to bring them to this moment. Isabel's decisions, Lucia's arrival, her own fears. Overcome day by day, Fernando's reappearance, the town's embrace. None of those paths had been straight or predictable. All had been full of unexpected turns, of obstacles that seemed insurmountable. And yet, here they were, on this winter night that contained the promise of spring, united not by blood but by something equally powerful, the conscious choice to be family. "Elena?" Lucia's voice was sleepy. "Yes, I love you." The words, so simple and yet so monumental, floated in the air like a blessing. "I love you too, Lucia," Elena replied, feeling that the words, though true, barely grazed the surface of what she really felt. More than words can express. Under January's stars, with the future unfolding before them like a blank canvas, mother and daughter remained in silence, listening to the whisper of poppies sleeping under the earth, waiting for their moment to bloom.